GMEAdmin Insights, the podcast dedicated to the GME community. I'm your host, Natasha Brox, and I'm thrilled to be back with you today. I talk a lot about how program coordinators need to know their craft in every part of GME. While I was at the ACGME conference, I visited the Rybar Group booth. When I saw the sign that says, "Don't leave your GME funds on the table," I knew that was a sign. I know that the Jimmy community has been talking more and more about ensuring they get all the money that they can for GME. And today I have Jesse Parker here to talk more about this. Jesse is the Director of Reimbursement at the Rybar Group and oversees projects involving cost reporting, reports, preparation, reimbursement, optimization, third-party audits, and assistance with all other healthcare reimbursements. Using his experience as a Medicare auditor and knowledge of the applicable regulation, he has helped hospitals throughout the country improve reimbursement in past, current, and future year cost report filings. Jesse has a special interest in ensuring teaching hospitals are receiving the proper amount of funding for ACGME approved and non-approved programs, regularly provides guidance pertaining to documentation reporting and communication with auditors. He is a certified public accountant. Welcome to GMEAdmin Insights, Jesse. I am so glad that you are here.
Thank you for having me, Natasha. I welcome any opportunity to discuss the importance of Medicare cost reports and the financial impact that they have on hospitals, especially academic medical centers.
Yes, thank you, because we need the information and we need our money. And that's a big impact to it, the cost reports.
Right.
So like I said, I was at the ACGM booth. I met you. When I saw that sign, I was like, yes, this is what we need. Keeping our funds in the program is something that the GME community, we always try to do. We always try to, stay informed, and all of the information that you have, it could help us to do this. And I knew I had to get you on, reach out to you, set something up so you could talk to us about this, because this is something that is very important. So we're going to jump right into this. I know that the listeners will be thrilled to hear this specific episode, because this is something that we always talk about. Like, how can we get more funding? How is this done? What can we do? So before we begin and get into all of the good stuff that we want to know, tell us about your journey. How did you go from being the Medicare auditor to working with Rybar, the Rybar Group?
I think actually the more interesting journey is not my path from Medicare auditor to the Rybar Group. It was from an aspiring public accountant in Michigan at age 25 to a Medicare auditor, which like I said, I was at a small CPA firm and outside of Michigan State University here in Lansing, Michigan. And it was days like this where there's gray and no sunshine. So I wanted to move to Florida, and I started submitting applications, and one responded from a Medicare administrative contractor, AKA the MAC, which I'll be honest, as a 25-year-old, I was not well versed in Medicare reimbursement, but I went down, I got the job, and was just kind of thrown to the wolves of reviewing the various cost reports. And in the fast forward 10 years and thousands of cost reports later, I developed a knack for their regulations and also an understanding process in which they're audited, which, as important as the preparation is, it's also going through those audits if you're going to retain your dollars. And at the end of that, or 10 years, like I said, 10 years later, I was approached, and we're in 2020. I was approached by the Rybar Group, which is consulting and specializing in healthcare reimbursement. And they also happen to be in Michigan too, which is where my family's from. So it was a match made in heaven. And I'm able to use that experience that I obtained as an auditor to help hospitals and coordinators and directors of reimbursement not only obtain the reimbursement that they're entitled to, but also keep that as you advance through the process.
So a public accounting to where you are now, That was a big switch. That was a big switch. So what made you, so it was just, I want to move to Florida, and it was the Medicare um accounting that made you start like helping with hospitals to receive those fundings. You said going through all of those cost reporting, you built that knack for it.
Well, yes, when the advantage that you have as an auditor is that, well, first, I like to say the best way to learn the Medicare cost report is to audit, and it sounds like I'm exaggerating, but audit hundreds of thousands of cost reports, not only because you're learning the various Medicare regulations, but you're also being exposed to how different hospitals prepare different work papers, how they prepare different documentation. You're communicating with representatives from all different hospitals. Like I said, I was at the MAC in Florida, which is jurisdiction N, which fortunately for the state of Florida is that there's a large amount of complex hospitals, especially large academic medical centers. And through that, I was able to seeing what hospitals are doing correctly. You also get about a better understanding where the errors are made. And that's something that when I came on the consulting side of it, I was able to use that experience to help reach out to these hospitals where I can see that they've either made errors in the past and we can correct those in the past and make sure we get that reimbursement from previous years. And then moving forward, make sure that those errors are not made. And I think also another big thing that I learned when I got to consulting is that when you're an auditor, you look at the cost report as it's just a document that has information about a hospital. But when you're on the consulting side, you're actually communicating with the people from the hospitals. You realize that it's so much. I mean, these dollars represent paying clinicians, buying equipment that ultimately, with the ultimate goal of providing care to patients, which is, I mean, it's very important, obviously.
True. So true. That is so true. It's on the paper, but eventually it comes off and it does reflect the bottom line.
Exactly.
So true. So how can like the GME, how can GME ensure that they are documenting accurately to reflect like the scope of like the resident training activities to maximize funding opportunities like within their cost report, if that's something that we can do? How can we do that?
I think the best approach is because this is the document, it's not usually the cost report preparer that's responsible for that resident documentation. It's the individual, it's the coordinators of those specific programs. I think the best approach is to assume that every resident, every rotation is going to be subject to audit.
Mm.
And that also means, when I say rotation, that means where that resident's at, if they're off-site, whether there's a documented letter of agreement with that off-site location that shows that the hospital is still responsible for that and can claim the FTEs.
Mm.
Because unfortunately, if you're unable to prove it through documentation, that's the same thing as viewed as an error to the auditor. And that's not, typically the errors are not viewed in isolation. That error could be extrapolated over the population, and then you're not only receiving less funding in that current year, but the years moving forward, they're going to apply the same error rate. So it's, in less words, it's doing what you can to ensure that all of the allowable time is being reported, but also doing your due diligence to make sure that if there is time that is not allowable, that you're also disclosing that too, because you want to receive the proper amount of funding, and the proper amount of funding is the optimal amount of funding.
So if they're on like a administrative rotation, which of course they're not seeing patients,
right?
So that would be, I mean, we can get paid for that.
Correct.
Period, point blank. Okay. So what if they're on an administrative rotation, but they like just say twice a week, they go, like for us, we're in emergency medicine. They may go in the ED maybe 2 or 3 times a week and work like a 10-hour shift. We would count those individual shifts.
Correct.
Okay.
Which, like I said, you'd want to make that, be able to explicitly state that in rotation, where you're blocking when he or she is in training related activities and when they're not in training related activities. And
Okay.
that type of documentation creates a precedent for future audits where you
Right.
start to, I don't want to say it's reviewed in less scrutiny, but when you're forthcoming with that information, it
Right.
establishes credibility with the auditors.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, because I know, like, with me, like, if I do have a resident that's on administrative rotation, they will go to the ED, like I said, a couple of times a week. So within new innovations, I will actually put, they're here, they're here, they're here,
Right.
they're here, and I break it down like exactly where they are. And then we do have a block diagram to actually show it as well, because different rotations,
Right.
they don't change of like when they're in the ED. It's like a blanket like type of thing.
Right.
So okay, so that's good. It's kind of like CYA, your residents, when they're not on a rotation, when they're on a rotation that is not a patient-driven site, basically, like
Right.
patient safety, if they're in the office with the C-suite or administrative rotation.
Right.
Okay, okay. So that's good to ensure, and they will only be paid for those days that they are actively working with patients.
Correct. Or patient, or in for if they're in research related activities that can be directly related to a specific patient,
Mhm.
then but obviously that's more difficult to document, and I mean, in big
Yeah.
picture, it's typically that's not what the research is going to be being conducted on.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. I totally understand,
And
especially
I've gone back and forth with auditors trying to prove that and I finally and you just have to say, all right, make the adjustment.
right. Yeah, because research can be very touchy sometimes. It's like,
Right.
I don't. That's why I don't like research rotations. Really, you have to really put more into it. So what are some common pitfalls or areas of oversight that we should um, look out for? That could reduce our funding.
From, I think, I think it's important that the program coordinator and those on that side because you have the reimbursement side and then you have the actual training side. I think it's important that the individuals involved with the programs on a day-to-day basis are informed about how the various mechanisms and the cost report and the regulations translate to what they're like. You and I had discussed in a previous call how an individual and his or her initial years of residency, how that impacts the reimbursement that you're going to receive. For instance, if an individual is in a 3-year program and then PGY 3, it's their fourth year of training, you're going to receive, that's good for direct GME purposes. That's going to be weighted at 0.5 as opposed to 1,
Right.
and you're going to receive half amount of the funding.
Right. Yeah. So I always say the best strategy is to take a regular. Like, when you are a 3-year program, have a resident that has not been in a program. Like surgery, that's fine. They have 5 or 6 years. So if a resident's done a year and they're a 5-year program and or a 6-year program, then they still have that room for that funding. You know, if you're a program you're trying to build, like expand, especially now, there's a lot of program expanding because
Right.
of the new CMS and the new guidelines and the rules now. So when you are building a program, you don't want to cap out really, really quick. You want to make sure that you do it correctly so you don't cap out.
Right.
What Now that I've said that, what would be like a golden rule or a strategy to not really, if a program is building, to not really cap out so fast? How could they do that?
Well, I may have to defer to you on what I see, and you touched on another point I was going to make about the expanding programs. Although I'm not as well versed on the building of those programs. I am very well versed on how those building programs, how that impact the funding.
Oh my God,
And
yes.
because for these new, for whether you're a new academic, whether you're new to teach, new to residents altogether, or you're an established teaching hospital that has met certain criteria where you can start building onto that cap, the calculation for the funding changes completely. I shouldn't say completely, there's certain mechanisms that
Mhm.
it have significant impact on those calculations that change, because CMS likes to see, as you're building a program, you're going to see spikes in the counts, and you're always based on the, for IME purposes, you're based on the lesser of the current and prior year. And so they like to smooth those out as opposed to spikes, and that's
Mhm.
something that is overlooked and has, you wouldn't believe the dollar amounts that I see that result from it. If you're looking, because it's based on a ratio, if that's off by 1%, I mean, that could be hundreds of thousands of dollars to millions of dollars.
Yeah. Wow.
And that's something that, and I know some of your listeners will probably see emails from me and why is this consultant reaching out to me? But each quarter CMS will publish the cost report data, and I'll go through that and I'll look for in these where I see a variance that doesn't fit what you're, kind of looks incongruent with what you would expect. And most of the times that will mean an error has been made and
Mm.
there's funding that's been lost. And fortunately, it's not, or fortunately, unfortunately, that's usually not as a result of anything that was done due to the documentation the coordinators submit to reimbursement. It's just something that typically cost reports are prepared on that last minute before the due date, and sometimes you overlook some of those
Mhm.
intricacies of these calculations.
Yep. That's why I tell everybody, especially when you're adding them into system like new innovations, when you add a resident, make sure you do it. You put all the information and you make sure it's very detailed, because that has an impact, especially on the back end with Iris. Like that has a
Right.
major impact. So once you put it in correctly, like every single one, I know we run our audits, and this time we ran, I was like, no gaps, no anything, great. I want to make sure, I don't, because I know when you said some of the coordinators are wondering why you're emailing. I know that feeling. I know that feeling. I do not want to be called on the carpet and be like, oh, shoot, I messed up. I missed something. You know what? That happened one time. And ever since then, I said, no way. No way. So it is something, that we do have to look at. What are some best practices you would think, just to tell the GME community, just some best practice on like what to watch out for or what to do, just to make sure they're not missing out on any money.
I think probably the best strategy for the GME community is make sure that there's communication between the individuals in GME and the individuals in reimbursement. That, because a lot of the times that information will go to reimbursement before the cost report is being prepared. If there's any, and at that point, it's too late in the game to make any changes that can either where you're correcting something or addressing something, or you're seeing a gaps 5 months after the fiscal year end is not the time to address that. I think that should be done on the interim basis, or at least where there's, I mean, at least because I think sometimes there's a disconnect between individuals on the clinical side and individuals on the numbers side.
That's true. That is true. So maybe run your reports 3 months ahead, just to make sure everything is lining up. There's no gaps. Everything looks good. Catch it on the forefront before
Right.
audits even happen. Yeah, I think that's what we do, um, because it's not even the end of the fiscal year yet. So, yeah, that is a good best practice to try to get into running them, so that way you're able to fix them before
Right.
you get ran and audited. Yeah, that is something that they can do. That is a good best practice to put into place. Um, especially you can catch all kind of errors. You're so right. You catch all kind of errors that can lead. And I have to go back to something you said about, a percentage can cost thousands of dollars. And when you said that, I thought about it because when you think about even 1%, but 1% when you're thinking about $100 million, right?
Right, right. And that's $100 million is not an unreal, I mean, they're academic teaching hospitals are typically large hospitals, and Medicare is typically a large portion of that patient mix, and it is
Yeah,
hundreds of by even a fraction of percent. It's something that, as far as funding for GME, I mean, it goes a long way.
yeah, it really does. Yeah, that put it in perspective with me when you said that because I'm like, 1% of $100,000 is still a lot of money to lose out on. So if you think about 1%, but what about 10%? You
Right,
know, that's money that you can put in patient care, resources for the residents, if they need items, ultrasound, just up,
right,
you know, faculty salary.
right.
That could be like that 1%.
And I mean, and we're not in the right industry to be leaving hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars out there on the table when it's the hospital's entitled to that funding.
Oh no, we are not. Wrong industry. Yes. Um, so what would be like some specific regulatory changes or updates um, that have had like significant impact on like the GME funding?
I think the most recent and significant regulatory change was how fellows are treated for the direct GME calculation. Previously, if a hospital was training above its cap for GME purposes or direct GME purposes, which if you're training above your cap, there's a calculation where you're penalized. And then also a fellow who is training outside of their initial residency period, by definition of a fellow, they've already completed
Right.
their initial residency, they're already like weighted at 0.5. So they would receive less than 0.5. There'd be a double penalty. And CMS, I'm sure it took years in the courts, but they eventually changed the treatment and removed that fellow's penalty. And so that you're not going to be, if you're training above your cap with fellows, you're going to at least be reimbursed for your cap level of FTEs and not below that.
That's good. That's good. That is great. That I actually didn't know yet. That's what I actually didn't know. So the penalty is taken away. The penalty is
Correct.
gone. That's good. That I mean, it's like it's kind of like a aha moment for them. Like, hello, they have to go through all of these years of education, and then the fellow is like it's the specialized, training. So why should there be?
Well, let me the fellows are still weighted at 0.5.
Mhm.
You're just not being penalized twice for training fellows and training fellows above your cap. So
So it's only one penalty,
correct, there's only one, which is better than
which
two
shouldn't even
penalties.
really that one penalty shouldn't even happen either.
And that's
A whole nother, a
that's
whole
for a different podcast. And
right.
then another, as we saw during COVID and result of the pandemic, there's just a shortage of trained physicians in our country. And I believe as a direct result of that, CMS started for the next few years, we'll be adding additional FTE slots because unfortunately teaching hospitals are not going to want to expand their programs if they're not going to receive any funding for those programs.
Right.
So I think we're entering into year 2 of the Consolidated Appropriations Act, those additional FTE slots that they awarded.
Yeah. Yeah. Two. Yeah. I have to count backwards. Yeah. Yeah, which I think is a great thing, which I
Right,
really think is a great thing because we do have a shortage. And the only way to fix that is to have more programs. And I see programs opening and expanding everywhere.
right,
Uh, I mean, everywhere. So, which is a great thing. But yes, if we are going to expand, then we do need that money for the residents because that's resources that now we have to, well, the hospital has to allocate, and they have to put out for these additional learners. So,
right. No, I agree. And I have a ACGME publishes all of the new sponsoring institutions each academic year, and I have those through 2026. So I know which one of those hospitals will have new teaching programs, and I'll be keeping my eye on those cost reports.
oh yeah, yeah, you'll see, yeah, you'll see us popping up in the if you haven't already. Yes. So there, there's a lot. There's a lot across this country. When the news came out, I was sat back and I was like, let me see who's going to expand. And literally, it's like everybody is
Right,
expanding. Everybody. But I'm hoping though that it will fix the shortage because like last year during the match there were so many who went unmatched that we could have had within the program to in a program across country to fill those gaps and to fill those needs. So I think this is it's an excellent thing. I think it's a great thing that's going on.
right. I think it's definitely needed to
Mm.
provide the opportunities to young physicians in training. And that obviously the next step of that is once they're in practice, I mean the burnout and which I can help all you want for the Medicare cost report. As far as physician burnout, out of my wheelhouse, but
So that's out of your league, huh?
you know.
I'll help you with the funding, but I can't help you with the burnout. The wellness that's on you. Yeah, that is true. But I'm hoping though, with more learners,
Right,
it will take some of the stress off.
right,
Right. That's what we can only hope.
right.
We'll
Fingers
see.
crossed.
We'll see in a couple more years as they come down the line. So, like, are there any like particular documentation requirements or reporting guidelines that are often overlooked by like the teaching hospitals that you see?
The easiest doc, the easiest documentation is always current documentation.
Oh,
Where I see issues is when, especially if you're in the process of, if you're building your program in that 5 year period, I might ask you for something from 5 years, the initial accreditation letter, maybe there's an affiliation agreement, signed affiliation agreement, state sign letters, and those need to be readily available because they are important. I mean, whether you, especially if you were throughout that cap building process, you were maybe at the start of it, your program was accredited for 15 FTE slots, but then 3 years into it, if you received three, three additional FTE slots, you'd want to be able to document that because the auditor is only going to give you credit for what you can document, and that's whether it's 15 or 18 is going to be a difference whether you're getting funding for when that cap, assuming you filled all those slots, whether you're getting funding for 15 residents or 18 residents or FTEs, I should say.
that's you said something. I didn't know that you guys needed the like if we did have a PLA. Um I didn't know you guys looked at that or wanted that. Um hmm, that's interesting. Um, just so we have a PLA with an outside rotation, you do take that into consideration.
Correct.
Oh, I
Correct.
didn't know that. Okay. Um, oh, you know why? Okay, now that I think about it, it does make sense because they're going outside, and if they go
Right.
outside,
They're outside of the hospital setting.
right? Okay. Okay. I just thought you guys looked at the block schedule or like with the new innovations, but you actually look at the PLA. See, you learn
Yeah.
something new every day. You learn something new every day.
And if you have, I mean, there's some, like I was back in my auditor days, I was working on a hospital that had I mean, there might be 45 PLAs out there for the various I mean, if you have 10 programs, you could have, each of those programs could have PLAs, and they're going to be requested. It's important to be able to have those readily available.
Mhm. You know what? And speaking about that, would you, I mean, and just from a funding, I know the answer, or my answer would be, but with you doing the funding and we're talking about PLAs and outside rotation, do you think it would be best to, as much as possible, keep everything in-house because that's where you get the most of your money?
See, I think that's a tough question because you also want to be able to provide the most valuable training to that resident, when sometimes, depending on the services provided at the hospital, there might be more valuable learning that can go on outside of the hospital walls. So I think it's a tough question, because
Okay.
with the ultimate goal being providing the best, that individual ended up being a doctor and providing the best treatment possible.
I can see that. I can see that. You know, I was always like, if we have it in house, keep it in house. But I can see, and then if we didn't have it in house, of course, you know, we outsource. But I could see, like, you know, even though we have it in house, if there is an outside, you know, rotation that will better like teach, and they can do more hands on, and they could, I can kind of see that. I can see where you're coming from with that. You know, I was always the in-house girl. Keep it in-house. We need the money, you know.
And that answer was, so nobody hears this and thinks, oh, all he does is look at spreadsheets. He doesn't.
Oh, I know, I know. Hey, you know, when you talk about the funding and the money, is like, you know, but on your end of it, you know, that'll be a lot of, I mean, but that is like a lot of going back and forth on, you know, you have what's in house. Okay, now they're going outside. Now they're going here. So I would
And
not.
by in-house, when you say out of house, are you referring to another teaching hospital that's going to be claiming? Okay,
Yes.
I'm referring to outside, whether they're at a different, where you still have that, you're still claiming the FTEs.
Oh no, I'm
Oh,
saying we
with
can't.
that clarification, keep those in-house.
Yeah, that's what when we say in-house, we mean in-house.
Okay,
Unless we actually have to set them outside to a whole nother institution, where yeah, we have to, you know, now they get the money, the funding
okay,
for that resident for the month. Yes.
okay,
Yeah. So I think we had the same wording but different meanings.
right,
Yeah, we want to keep all our funding. Well,
right,
especially when we are building, right? Especially when we're building residencies, we want to make sure we keep as much in-house until we get to that certain point, and then
right.
it goes from there. Yeah. So now that we're on the same page, uh, I love to talk about like the funding and optimizing, you know, what we have. I just think that, especially when we do have the teaching doctors to help us build, you know, programs and patient care, and just, I think that's just my whole passion, you know, about it, and GME, and just not just like, okay, let's get these residents in, let's get them out, but everything
Right.
that works and intertwines with it all the way down to patient care.
No, and I could sense that when you asked me, when you approached me with the podcast, I thought, wait, I get to talk about GME funding, Medicare cost reports. So we just need to keep this to a tight 2.5 hours and we'll be good.
In 2.5 hours. So you can talk about it all day too, huh? Oh yeah, I think it's key. I think that everyone, no matter what part of GME you're in, you need to know, because no matter what your position is, it still affects the budget. It still affects the funding, how you enter them into your system, whether it's MedHub or New Innovations, how you enter them in the block schedule and where they go, all the way up to the auditors. Everybody has
Right.
a play in the funding. So from the smallest to the big, everyone needs to know the components of it and how they play into the big picture of things.
Right.
So yeah. So how does like Rybar Group approach any cost reporting preparations for teaching hospitals for both ACGM and non-ACGME? Because I know you guys do both. We got to ensure that the funding, the allocation across like the training activities.
Well, and the funding is not going to be, because the funding mechanisms for the non-approved programs is much different than
That's
the
so
approved
true.
programs.
That's true.
But it's been my journey in 2024 to find these hospitals that are offering these non-approved programs, because I combed through the data. There's about 28 hospitals that are receiving the funding for those programs, but I guarantee there's not only 28 institutions that are providing that training. And it's because it's different documentation. It's not as, and it's completely separate. It's
Right.
but you can at least say you have a resident, you're not being reimbursed you're only being reimbursed for the time spent with patients for these non-approved programs.
Right.
But if you're not going through the proper channels to report that, to claim that reimbursement, you're providing that training for zero, it's costing you money and you're not going to receive any reimbursement for it. And then, so that's conversations that are necessary to have with the program coordinators, because there's going to be different expectations of what documentation is going to be requested. And it's always those, for specifically the non-approved programs, those first years, that first year where you're claiming it, where you're going to submit that cost report, and the auditor is going to be like, what the heck is this? And they're most likely going to audit it. And that's when in the initial years, when you establish the precedent that we have the documentation, we know what we're doing. You don't worry about auditing this for the next 3 years, and then because they'll usually audit it every 3 years.
Well, that's good to know, because I do know a lot of programs across country that may have like a non-approved program, and they don't. They
Right.
just, even though they may set up that program like the ACGME, like the same requirements and all of that, but they don't get funding for it because
Right.
the stamina is it's not approved, we can't get paid.
Right.
So that's good to know. And see, this is why, if you don't know, talking to an expert is the way to go, because like we don't know everything and that's not our forte. And then you know how it is, like that's always how it's been done, right?
Right. No, same as last year. I mean, but
Right.
if which sometimes that same as last year is not the same as it was done in 2023, because guess what they did in 2023? The same as they did in 2022, and that will go back, and
Yeah.
things change, and there's like you should always be looking for the best practice.
Right.
And two, programs change, and a lot of times with those non-approved programs, how the person in reimbursement will see that program is that's just a salary that rolls up into a department, and those those rotations are not being claimed in the IRIS report.
Mm-hmm.
And so they may think that they're being reimbursed for those costs, but at the end of the day, there is no reimbursement.
Right. Right. And this is why, GME community, this is why you have to reach out and then ask questions, right? And just see how you can get any type of funding, right? It doesn't hurt to ask questions, set something up, ask those questions to see, can I get reimbursed for this? How can I set this up? And then go from there. Because all we know is what what of course was done in the program.
Right,
We are not the accountants, we're not the auditors. We only know what we know.
right.
So, like now, reaching out to you, I bet you a lot of programs didn't know this. So now they know, and now they have somebody to reach out to.
All right, yeah, the most important thing is be curious. If there's something that you're not informed on,
Yes,
be,
yes.
yeah, look for a source of that information.
That is good to know. I know we were going to set up two that was not, um, they were not ACGME accredited, and everybody was like, "Well, you know what? Well, who's going to pay for it? How we're going to get funded?" I'm like, but now I
Which,
know.
like I did say, the mechanisms are different, and you're
Right.
not going to be reimbursed for all of your costs, but it's typically your Medicare reasonable cost, which is going to be, depending on your utilization, you're going to see like 30 to 35% of your costs being reimbursed, which
Mhm.
at the end of the day, it's less than 100, but it's more than 0%.
I mean, some beats none. That's 33% you didn't have before.
Correct.
So is it ever too late to be like, okay, we've had this um, for a year that we didn't set up for, and we have another year? Is it too late to be like, okay, so the year, moving forward, can we now set it up to where we can claim the
No,
33?
you can do that, and you can go back and revise all of those cost reports.
See,
CMS has certain windows depending on when the cost report was finalized, but no, you can go backwards to a certain extent and then forwards with it. Trust me, I have emails where I'm asked, can I look at this 2014 cost report and help you get the reimbursement for these non-approved programs?
wow. Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. So that'd be great. That's like extra money. That's why when I seen that sign that says "Don't leave money on the table," this is exactly what you were talking about, and was exactly what was in my head. Like, don't leave anything, and going back, because they go back 5 years. Like, they will come back knocking on your door. Like, I need 5 years of whatever. So,
Right,
like, don't leave money on the table. This is exactly what I envisioned when I read that sign. Like, this is what we need. We need our funding, and
right,
that go to the experts. Just go to the experts. You guys, it's like you know what you're doing. You know how to maximize the dollar. So who better to do it than the experts? You know, and that's a
totally agree.
totally why I envisioned when I read that sign. That's a great sign. That was a great sign. I don't know who came up with
I'll
it.
pass that on to our marketing team, and that will be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, yeah, especially now, especially like with everything going on, that was a great sign because I had to double back on that one, like for real. Eye catching, and it caught my attention. Uh, okay, so for my final question, so how does the Rybar Group like stay abreast on, because there's so many changes? Like, how do you guys stay abreast on like the latest changes and the updates, especially within the healthcare like reimbursement guidelines and regulations, to ensure like your clients, are accurate in what they do, and we have like timely guidelines.
Well, we participate in the various hospital associations and medical organizations, whether it be HFMA. I mean, we had the pleasure of meeting at the ACGME annual conference in Orlando,
Yes.
which that was our first year attending, but I think that'll be a mainstay moving forward, just
Oh,
because that's a
really?
valuable experience
Oh,
and
yes.
learning opportunity. Working with the Medicare administrative contractors, learning what they're going to be looking at. Like I said, that was my previous career. I've maintained those relationships, and that audit's always better when you know the person, when you can have the person that's completing the audit. And also, I mean, we have relationships from CMS. I mean, CMS probably doesn't appreciate the frequency that they receive emails from me, but sometimes if you want guidance on a regulation, there's no better source than the ones that wrote it.
Right, that puts it together. Go to the source. Yes.
And I think the one thing that all of these groups and individuals have in common is that the ultimate goal is to ensure that academic medical centers, the reporting is accurate and they're receiving the funding that they're entitled to.
That's true.
And I think also, you had mentioned before that this is your passion. It is also my passion, and that's what you're not staying up to date on all of the new regulations and changes and whatnot because it's your job. You're staying because it's what you, and it's because it's fun.
Yes. Yes.
And we make a difference doing it. I think is also what's important. It's not. It may seem like spreadsheets on some days, but it's also we're making a difference in what we do.
So true. So true. To help the future physicians. Yep. I said the same thing. I think like ACGME, yeah, I didn't know it was your first year there. I'm glad you came. I'm glad you guys came. Especially, for me. But yeah, that is, a conference you guys definitely should be at, especially with all of the different programs that
Right.
are there, and especially with what you do and what's going on and how everybody is growing and building. Major impact, you guys, major impact. So yeah, thank you so much for joining me today on GMEAdmin Insights. And so if listeners want to connect with you to get more information, what's the best way that they can do that? What's the best way they can reach out to you?
Thank you, Natasha. I really enjoyed my time discussing with you. Probably the listeners can connect with me on LinkedIn or visit the rybargroup.com for my contact information.
Okay. All right. You heard
And
it.
if I don't hear from them, they'll probably be receiving an email from me. One of these, if I find something, I will reach out.
And I'll just forward it right on to you. Be like, yep, no, that's not my expertise. Let me give you to Jesse. Because I don't know. I go to him. Yeah, thank you so much, Jesse, though, for being on the podcast, and for giving us, your insight, because I know that it is greatly appreciated and needed, in the GME community. So thank you so much.
Thank you. This was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. So today we have been speaking with Jesse Parker with the Rybar Group, giving the GME community some great gems to help us, with our funding for our program. So reach out to him if you have any questions, about anything that we spoke with today. And with that concludes another enlightening episode of GMEAdmin Insights. And remember, your dedication keeps the gears of GME turning. And with that, we are out. I think I found her. She's